Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're going to critically analyze some news. That's what we do here. So I hope that you will like the video, you will subscribe to the channel, and stick around to the end because we're going to look at a very interesting topic today. Yes, unless you are living under a rock, you've probably heard the news about North Korean soldiers. They have arrived in Europe. They're in Europe now. It's very scary, so to say. That's what the news is telling you. They're in the Ukraine, or are they in Russia? Well, nobody really seems to know. So we're going to talk about some of these things. But let's give you a brief introduction. We're going to talk about some of the effects of this news. So please do stick around to the end. And like I said, please subscribe to the channel. Help me out. Help out the algorithm. And don't forget to like the video, write a nice comment, and share it with all your friends to tell the world exactly what's going on. Because here we are going to critically analyze the news. Well, as you may know, Vladimir Zelenski is the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelenski. Yeah, he wears a green t-shirt, and he runs around and trying to, so to say, defend his country. It's been attacked by Russia. If you woke up in 2022, you're probably wondering why. But if you've been around a little bit longer than that, you may know why. But we're not going to talk about the conflict's history. That will be another episode if you help us out by helping out the algorithm. Today, we're going to talk about what he said a couple weeks ago. Yeah, he got on the news. He used to be a comedian, if you don't know. Before he was president, he was a comedian, and he decided that he would try another comedy stint. And he got up and said, North Korean soldiers are in the Ukraine. Yeah, that was quite the comedy, because everybody laughed at him then, and nobody believed him. Not at that time, but then it started appearing in the news everywhere, and sure enough, somebody did believe him. That would be the president of South Korea, Mr. Yoon Suk Yeol. He said to his spy agency, go and spy on the Russians and find out what's going on and talk to their ambassador and tell him that we are very angry because of what Mr. Zelensky said. And the Russians, they just laughed because, well, we knew that Mr. Zelensky was a comedian. But sure enough, the spy agency said that there are North Korean soldiers in Vladivostok, near Vladivostok, which is not very far away from the border of North Korea and Russia. We know that Russia and North Korea, they have a alliance. They've been doing more trade, more economic trade, and more military trade, apparently. So they said the soldiers were training. But the thing is that in Russia, there are a lot of people with Asian faces, unbeknownst to most of the West. Well, Russia is also a very diverse country, and it has a very long history, and so does Korea. Korea is not a diverse country because they used to be a hermit kingdom, and then they were colonized by Japan, and then they had a civil war and have been divided since then. When they were colonized by Japan, many Koreans escaped into China and Russia. Then Russia became the Soviet Union, and Joseph Stalin, he got the idea of mixing people around, and everybody kind of moved around the Soviet Union, including the Koreans. Many of them ended up in Central Asian countries, which were part of the Soviet Union, but many of them also ended up in different parts of Russia and mixed into the Russian population. And then we had people like the Mongol type people, the Turkic people, so to say, like the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz, the Uzbeks, the Uyghurs. And some of them also look very Mongoloid, just like the Koreans. There's also Mongolians, Buratians, and many other similar type ethnic groups that all have similar type faces. They don't look like Europeans. So Russia, it's a very ethnically diverse country. And maybe the comedian in charge of Ukraine saw some Asian faces. He probably knows better, but he thought, well, we are losing, and let's see if we can get NATO involved. So he got the South Koreans on his side, and not long after that, of course, NATO has agreed. And then we have heard from the U.S. They're saying that North Korean troops are in Russia. First, they were saying they were in the very east part. Now they're saying they're going to the front lines. Let's go ahead and dive into some news and look at some reactions from different people around the world. And we're going to analyze it. Don't forget to keep sticking around, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Help out the algorithm and write some nice comments. And so there's a lot of different theories about what the North Korean troops are doing. We know that they're in eastern Russia. That is according to several different countries. South Korea has said so, NATO, and of course the Ukrainians. And we all know that Zelenski, he has his own agenda. He wants more weapons, and South Korea is willing to send him weapons. He wants NATO on the ground. He wants troops on the ground from other countries. The Ukrainian, they have some propaganda. I'm not sure that they believe their own propaganda. They might be foolish enough, but maybe they don't. But they're putting out propaganda 3 times a day, meals for North Korean soldiers. If you surrender and become a prisoner, I don't know how many soldiers will surrender for 3 meals a day. Probably not very many, except maybe ones from the Ukraine, because we know that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers have been surrendering. Yeah, that's what happens when you go and force them off the streets. If you look at the history of the conflict, which is a different topic, you can start to understand why the Ukrainians maybe don't want to fight, especially the ones that are more ethnically Russian. As we talked about, in Russia, there are many ethnic groups. And that is the case in Ukraine also. We do know, however, if we look up here at Kursk, this is Kursk, the Ukrainians have made an incursion. It is quite likely that if North Korean troops really are going into the battlefield, if you listen to the Russians, they haven't really said. They've said that what they will be doing in Russia is basically in framework of international law. However, what we heard the U.S. ambassador at the United Nations, he certainly seemed to have a different opinion, and he seemed to think that this is an escalation. The fact that North Korean troops are stationed in Russia, well, I don't know why that's such an issue. I wonder how many American troops are stationed in Ukraine, and I wonder how many are stationed in European countries, how many are stationed in the Middle East, how many have gone to Israel recently. Now that would definitely be a nice escalation, as there is a genocide going on over there. Very terrible indeed. But that's a different topic. That will be from a different video. The fact is that the Western countries and South Korea and Ukraine, many countries, they seem to be quite hypocritical. I do think that the Ukrainian propaganda is quite funny. Yes, Zelenski is a comedian. As I've said, you have to take everything he says with a grain of salt. But yeah, the fact that he has said, and somebody in Ukraine must believe it. I wonder if they have someone around who can speak Korean. Probably they do, because I mean they are a big country. I'm sure there's a few people in their country that speak Korean. If not, they'll just ask the South Koreans to write their propaganda to tell the North Koreans to surrender for food. I've seen a lot of Western media, and this is where we have to think critically here, saying that the North Korean soldiers, they haven't really even seen them. They haven't verified them. I do think it is possible that they could go to Kursk. That would not be unlikely. And they could be defensive. They don't even know. They can't even agree how many there are. Are there 3,000? Sometimes they say 12,000. I think Zelenski said 10,000. Sometimes they say less. Sometimes they say there's even less than 3,000. Some of them are in eastern Russia. They don't know. It's just all speculation. But the funny thing is, when they say, let's have them surrender, and we will feed them 3 times a day. Yep, Korean people and Asians in general are a bit smaller than Slavic people and European people. They also have a different diet. McDonald's, well, it's just about everywhere in the world. I don't think it's made it to North Korea yet. That's probably to their advantage. They get their local food, probably. Yeah, like even if you go to Russia, and probably in Ukraine too. I've never been to Ukraine, but I've been to Russia and been to some Central Asian countries. Yeah, you'll see people, they eat a very more natural type food. They go like into the mountains, and they know like what kind of berries, what kind of fruits go mushroom hunting. They can tell you which ones are poisonous, which ones are not. And I can tell you in America, and probably in most Western countries, including myself, I have no idea. Yeah, I couldn't survive like the Russians probably can, or the Koreans probably can. I've also been to South Korea. South Korea has very good food. I'm sure North Korea has the very similar food, probably also very good and natural. And you'll see a lot of rice and vegetables. And of course, you'll see kimchi. Kimchi is very good. You can come over to Wikipedia and we can see what is kimchi. Kimchi is very traditional, very old dish from the Korean peninsula. And it's also popular in some other countries. It's kind of made its way around a bit. And there's a lot of different versions. Yeah, we look right here at Wikipedia. It says there are hundreds of different types of kimchi made from different vegetables as main ingredients. Yeah, I wonder if the Ukrainians are going to be serving their prisoners of war kimchi. Somehow, I doubt it. Borscht is also from Ukraine, and that is very, very good. I like borscht. I think, for me, borscht would be more of a temptation, but I don't think borscht will tempt North Koreans to surrender. Yeah, I guess they say that food is what gets to men, but I don't think it's going to work. Yeah, I thought that was very funny. But coming back to kimchi, kimchi is traditional, and there are many different kinds. It says nowadays people store them in their refrigerators. Most women in South Korea, and I'm sure in North Korea, and other Korean communities in China or Russia or Central Asia, United States, Canada, wherever, they can make kimchi all by themselves with their hands, which is something that I can't do. That's pretty impressive. It's basically a fermented type of cabbage. You can also make it with other types of vegetables. It has garlic, ginger, all sorts of healthy things. Spring onions, certainly more healthy than a McDonald's or a Burger King. That you will definitely see a lot of those in South Korea. But they do like their kimchi there too. There also talks about the history of the word. But if you come down, it says prior to refrigerators, they used the pickling of vegetables and created kimchi to preserve the lifespan of foods. It says in Korea, kimchi was made during the winter. I think it was actually made before the winter. And they would ferment the vegetables and they'd bury it in the ground. And since it's very cold there, I guess it would act as a refrigeration. And they had these traditional pots. And if you go to South Korea, even in Seoul, you can see people come from the countryside, especially at the right time of year. And they will sell their natural kimchi. Of course, in South Korea, everything's all commercialized, just like in the West. I've never been to North Korea, and I think it's a more traditional and cultural country. They probably do it the more traditional way, and I would assume it's less spicy. It's also less spicy in Russia and Central Asia. And in China, well, it depends on the community, I suppose. Yeah, it's been a staple in Korean culture for a very long time. Russian and Ukrainian food is very similar to each other, but Korean food is very different from Russian food. And I do think that maybe Russians, they have some ideas of Korean food. You know, sushi is very popular in Russia, which is from Japan. But there is Korean kimbap, which is also something very similar. Also something made from like rice and fish or vegetables. You know, something very fresh and healthy, not like your McDonald's or whatever. So, of course, yeah, these people, they're not going to be big and fat. Well, most of them. I would assume that they're probably pretty healthy, and these soldiers will be well disciplined, and more likely they'll be coming in as engineers and workers, maybe to help with construction or help with repairing things that have been blown up, because that's what happens in wars. And they'll get a bit of a chance to see what it's like to be in war. North Korea has not been in a war for a very long time. Technically, they're still at war with the South and with the U.S. too, I believe. There have not been really any fighting since 1953. That's a very long time. And there's very big tensions around the world, including on the Korean Peninsula. We can see there's a lot of polarization. This is probably not the best thing in the world. I think it would be better if we could handle things more diplomatically, and we wouldn't have this situation here where Ukraine is losing men and they're losing territory, and they have a comedian in Kiev who doesn't know what to do, so he just asks the West for whatever he wants. I want more missiles. I want more soldiers. If you don't give me more soldiers, I'll make up some fabrication. Like I said, you have to take it with a grain of salt, and we have to think critically about what we hear in the news. North Korea is one of the most sanctioned countries of the world, and now so is Russia. that didn't have to be that way, and we could have good relations with these countries. But of course, we have to have instead conflict. We have even more terrible conflict in places like the Middle East. But that is a different topic. So if you want to hear more about the Middle East, I would suggest that you subscribe to the channel and like the video, help out the algorithm, because we're going to need your help. The point is that we need to think critically about what we hear in the news. We don't just take what we hear from some comedian or some politician, but we actually do some research and we think about what's in the news and we can see more deep what is happening. The conclusion we made today is that there's a lot of hysteria over something that's really not a big deal. There's also a lot of propaganda and a lot of polarization, but the fact is, most likely, there's a few thousand soldiers coming in for training, or maybe to help repair things, or to help fortify the borderlines. The conflict doesn't spiral out of control, and in my opinion, that's not a bad thing. That's why we should have allies, and we should have friends, but hopefully all the nations can find peace, and we will not have these type of conflicts. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video.